Have you ever faced this kind of situation when trying to remember something but you just can't? Maybe I'm just too old to learn. But wait! We have the thing to solve your problems, along with some learning techniques to help you remember and understand things easier and make those memories permanent. Well, it turns out that we have two types of memory, our working memory and our long-term memory. Working memory, scientists say that our working memory has about 4 slots due to its limited capacity. When information enters our sensory memory, it needs to organize this massive information into our long-term memory. Let's try and see how many items you can remember in the right order. How many can you remember? Most people are able to remember about 5 to 6 items in the correct order. When you're trying to remember, you're currently using your working memory to remember new information. This exercise shows the limited capacity of our working memory. Although we may have limited working memory capacity, there is a way to help you remember all 12 items on the list in the episodes coming up. Let's imagine that there's an octopus in your brain with its arm only being able to hold 4 balls. Your octopus is trying to remember new information or trying to grasp a new concept with only using 4 arms. This part of your memory can be compared to a piece of paper for your scratch notes. Once you have filled up the page, you can't ask for another one. The only way to keep this information is to send it for storage in your long-term memory. Long-term memory has a huge capacity. It can store up to about 1 petabyte of information. That is 15 zeros or equivalent to 4.7 billion books. Or if you take a 1 gigabyte flash drive, you would be able to line them up next to each other to cover the space of 92 football fields. Wow! That is enough memory space that you can never use up in this lifetime. This part of your memory can be compared to a large storage warehouse with massive space, where it would be really hard to retrieve newly stored information. The long-term memory is responsible for storing and retrieving information that the brain considers to be important for future use.
We discussed 2 main memory systems involved in your ability to chunk concepts. The first is long-term memory, which is like a storage warehouse. You need to practice and repeat in order to help store items in long-term memory so you can retrieve them more easily. Practicing and repeating all in one day is a bad idea. You want to extend your practice to several days. This is why tackling procrastination is important. It helps you build better memories because you start earlier. The second is working memory, which is like a poor blackboard that quickly fades. You can only hold about 4 items in your working memory. When you master a technique or concept, in some sense, it compacts the ideas so they can occupy less space in your working memory when you do bring them to mind. This frees your mental thinking space so that it can more easily grapple with other ideas.
Every time you learn something, your neurons are making connections and forming neural links into complicated networks. From the moment we are born, we accumulate massive information stored away in our brains. Information that has been practiced and retrieved many times will become much stronger links, allowing the working memory to easily access it so fast that sometimes you don't even know you're thinking about it. Let's turn back time to when you were in school. When you're learning something for the first time, like the multiplication table, you might take some time to memorize it, But now, when you see 2 times 6, you instantly know that the answer is 12 without thinking about it. Once you start storing information that passes through your working memory into your long-term memory, information here is massive and piles up on top of each other when being stored away, making it hard to look for specific information to retrieve. You would have to practice many times so that your octopus's arms can reach into different areas of the stored space to find what you are looking for.
Here's a way to picture what's going on. When you first begin to understand something, for example, how to solve a problem, the neural pattern you form is there, but very weak, kind of like the faint pattern at the top of our pinball machine analogy here. When you solve the problem again, fresh from the start, without looking at the solution, you begin deepening that neural pattern, kind of like the darker pattern you see here in the middle. And when you have the problem down cold, so you can go over each step completely and concisely in your mind without even looking at the solution, and you've even had practice on related problems, why then the pattern is like this dark, firm pattern you can see towards the bottom of the pinball frame. Practice makes permanent.
When learning something new, massive information enters our brain into our working memory. A working memory starts by accessing chunks that we have created prior in our long-term memory to make these connections or create new ones. This begins the process of understanding. Chunks that are strong will make new information easier for understanding. When learning something new, you need to break down large chunks of new information so that they can be stored away in your long-term memory in order to access it and retrieve it later. This process is known as chunking. When trying to understand something, we may find it sometimes hard to grasp the concept, or when we try to retrieve something that we had just learned, we find it hard to recall. This is because we haven't created those usable chunks in our long-term memory yet. Either those chunks are still weak, the neural connections hasn't been built, or we haven't broken down the large chunks of information small enough to understand just the basic concept of it. Or we haven't made any connections between those new information to what we already know. In other words, the chunks we already have. Lastly, our working memory may be working too hard, a cognitive overload, because of handling massive information that hasn't been broken down for easy storage. Let's talk about chunking. It is divided pieces of information connected through meaning so that it's easier for our brains to digest the concept and store that information. Now let's see how we can create and use these chunks.
When you first look at a brand new concept, it sometimes doesn't make much sense, as shown by the jumbled puzzle pieces here. Chunking is the mental leap that helps you unite bits of information together through meaning. The new logical whole makes the chunk easier to remember and also makes it easier to fit the chunk into the larger picture of what you're learning. Just memorizing a fact without understanding or context doesn't help you understand what's really going on or how the concept fits together with other concepts you're learning. Notice there are no interlocking puzzle edges on the puzzle piece to help you fit into other pieces.
Learning something new can be explained like this. When we are facing with massive information, especially ones that we are not familiar with, the octopus in your brain will not know how to put the pieces of information together. It will start by creating and breaking down massive information into small pieces, connecting them through meaning to form small pieces of information links known as chunks. As you practice, your octopus will eventually be able to create stronger links from those pieces of chunks. If you practice even more, you'll be able to create even much stronger links and longer ones. At this point, you'll be able to start to make sense of what you're trying to learn. Things will be more clearer and you'll be able to retrieve information from your memory much easier. Say that learning a new skill is like eating a gigantic piece of steak. What you want to do is cut the steak into manageable sized pieces before eating them. This is what chunking is. There are 3 steps to chunking. The third is to focus undivided attention on the information you are wanting to create the chunks without any distractions. The first time you are learning something new, you are creating new neural links that you need to connect with previous learnings or other scattered information throughout your brain. Therefore, you'll need to focus undivided attention. If you have the TV running in the background, or you keep checking your phones or emails, it will be difficult for you to create those chunks because your brain is constantly distracted doing other things. We can compare this to your friendly octopus with its limited arms is trying to grapple many things at the same time. The second step is understanding basic ideas or concepts. Seeing the big picture first will help you get an overview of what you're trying to learn. When you're trying to understand a new concept, you must use your focus and diffuse modes. Understanding is like super glue for your learning. Can you create a new chunk without understanding the main ideas first? Yes, but it will be a very useless chunk. This will be like rote learning, just like a piece of jigsaw puzzle with no arms or legs to connect to other pieces. The third step is finding context. Although we have created many strong chunks, we need to know when to use or when not to use them in different contexts. By knowing context, you'll be able to know where to place each chunk in the big picture. Chunking involves two main processes, top-down and bottom-up. Learning happens in two directions. Bottom-up processing of information is inductive reasoning, or small chunk processing is a method by which you gather small chunks of information and build up a conclusion. The other one is top-down processing, which is the opposite of bottom-up. It is referred to deductive reasoning, or large chunk processing, which is a method when you first see the big picture and then analyze the parts. Both of these processes are vitally important to learning because it allows you to know when to use each technique. Practicing will help you expand those neural links from your chunks. It will make those connections between the chunks much stronger and easier to access. However, not knowing context is like having a set of tools in your toolbox, but not knowing when to use each one.
Is simply to focus your undivided attention on the information you want to chunk. If you have the television going on in the background, or you're looking up every few minutes to check or answer your phone or computer messages, it means you're going to have more difficulty in making a chunk because your brain is not really focusing on chunking the new material. The second step in chunking is to understand the basic idea you're trying to chunk, whether it's understanding a concept such as continental drift, seeing the connection between the basic elements of a plot for a story, grasping the economic principle of supply and demand, or comprehending the essence of a particular type of math problem. Students can often synthesize the gist, that is, figure out the main idea or ideas, pretty naturally, or at least they can grasp those ideas if they allow the focused and diffuse modes of thinking to take turns in helping them figure out what's going on. The third step to chunking is gaining context so you can see not just how, but also when to use this chunk. Context means going beyond the initial problem and seeing more broadly, repeating and practicing with both related and unrelated problems so that you can see not only when to use the chunk, but when not to use it.
No matter who you are, whether you're a musician, a linguist, or a sports player, you can all benefit from chunking. Let's say you wanted to play a song on the guitar. That song is like a humongous chunk. You would start by listening to the song or maybe watch someone else play. Then you'll start to place your fingering on the chords and begin to play short verses. After a few days, you'll be able to connect those many verses into one song entirely. When learning a language, such as speaking Spanish, it may not be necessary to know the meaning of every word in a sentence. You can just get by if you know the context, what each phrase means, and when to use it. In playing any sports, such as basketball, you might start from catching the rhythm of dribbling the ball, then moving on to sequential moves. each step you take to learning new moves, you're creating mini chunks to be put together in a single combination of moves. Focusing on your practice and creating stronger neural connections will help you to create even bigger, stronger chunks. The pathway to success is created bit by bit. These small chunks can combine into one mega chunk, leading to your success. There are two types of memory. Working memory, which has a limited capacity. When massive information enters our brain, it must be broken down into chunks for easy storage and access in the long-term memory. Long-term memory is compared to a large storage warehouse with massive capacity. When information is being stored from the working memory, it needs to be broken down and classified before storage. These storage of information are connected through meaning and relations. This will help out our friendly octopus to easily access those information and know where to look for them. Practice will help create stronger neural links and make your chunk much bigger and more defined, making it much harder to forget while also enhancing your understanding of concepts you are trying to learn. When learning new things, massive information enters your working memory. Your octopus begins to make connections of new pieces of information to what you already have. If that information is new, then it will break down the large piece of information into small chunks and connect them through meaning. Hence, the process of understanding begins. If you are learning familiar topics, when you practice information that is already in your long-term memory, those connections will become stronger. Your chunks can expand and you will be able to make more complicated connections. The octopus in your working memory can extend its tentacles, reach out and grab those information much more easily and quickly, so fast that at times you don't even know you're thinking about it. So why is it that sometimes we don't understand or can't remember some things? When you try to understand something you're learning and have a hard time grasping the concept, that is because the chunks in your long-term memory have not been created or is very faint. You haven't been able to break down the information into small, manageable chunks so that your memory could hold on to it. Or those newly created chunks haven't been connected through meaning enough so that you're able to see the big picture or understand the concept. Overall, information here hasn't been stored efficiently in your long-term memory. There are 3 steps to chunking. 1. Focus undivided attention on what you're trying to learn. 2. Understand the main ideas or basic concepts first. Fill in the details later. 3. Look for context. Although you have created chunks, you need to know when to use each one and when not to use each one. Remember, practice is key.